welcome to a new Capital Ideas. I'm Sandy Behan, and our guest this morning, first one of the year, is Laura Boyd. Welcome back.
Good morning, Sandy. It's good to be here. Another year already.
I expected to see you in Chicago.
Well, I have had numerous people asking me about why I'm not in Chicago, and it had never occurred to me to go. Certainly we're in the middle of an election cycle. There's much to do here in Norman, but I have to admit that once things started on television Monday night, I had an inkling that I'd sure like to have a little time to be there.
How does the party, you're of course Democratic, and how does your party select people who tend to attend something like that?
The delegates are selected by the districts. We have 4 or 6 districts in Oklahoma that are elected nominees through the process at the annual convention each spring.
Okay, and so it's just private citizens who indicate a desire to go?
Actually, there are people who have been very involved in the party, workers usually who've been very active. There is the opportunity for elected officials to also go in an unofficial capacity. But typically, your delegates are individuals who have earned their way, if you will.
Okay, they did a big spiel in the Daily Oklahoman about the Republican candidates in San Diego, and how the ones from Norman especially got a lot of press, but there didn't seem to be many that they talked about in Chicago from anywhere, but specifically not from Norman. Are there people there from Norman?
Yes, sir, and actually I've seen different press from the Norman people. This morning's Oklahoman surprisingly mentions some of the Norman representatives up there. But you also have to look at which paper you're talking about. When you're talking about the Oklahoman, I did notice this morning also that the president's speech received less of a headline and less of a front page story than the behavior of one of his advisors, which was terminated yesterday.
I noticed
so we have to look at the source.
Okay, but even in the transcript, they didn't seem to do much with it.
There was an article earlier this week about Dan Rambo having been there in '68 and then having been there now, and also had a picture, which I'm sure he will thoroughly enjoy, of '68 to now, showing the differences.
You're going to share it with him, right?
I have saved him several copies.
Okay, very good. You, of course, are going up for re-election this fall.
That's correct.
And you did not have opposition in the primary, but the Republican Party did run 2 people, and the primary was last Tuesday, and now we've defined who your candidate's going to be. What do you perceive the issues to be this fall as you go through the campaign?
Well, I will run my campaign regardless of whomever my opponent would be. We have had a very successful legislative session the last 2 years. Actually the last 4 years. The last 2 years were particularly productive in the areas of money for education, in terms of making advancements in safety and justice, in terms of what we did for children and families, as well as economic growth. So we have demonstrated an ability to put forward proposals and to carry those into law on behalf of Oklahoma. Our economic situation is the best it's been in a number of years. In fact, this year, for the first time in 5 years, we deposited $95 million to the Rainy Day Fund, as opposed to drawing from that fund as we have most recently.
Okay, one of the things that the governor talks about is, of course, building roads and transportation and transit, all in the area of building roads, building highways, building turnpikes, whatever. But there's more to transportation than just that. There's the whole issue of public transportation, and we are not a state that historically has supported public transportation to any great extent. Do you see that changing?
We did change it in some very important ways this year. Number one, we did have a major appropriation for transportation, as you know, in the state budget, more than the governor requested. But the issue of educating the people about mass transit is still very, very important. We had a late night crisis, if you will, in May, where there was a bill that would have cut the routes in Norman, and particularly on Saturdays, and in other towns in terms of mass transit, with a lot of scurrying around on both sides of the House and the Senate. We were able to reinstate money that would allow us to maintain our Saturday routes here, and it became very clear that we have a population that depends on public transit. Because we do, that should be very important to the business community. Individuals often have to delay their personal business until a Saturday. And so I think in some ways it takes these kinds of crises to get the whole public to realize that while I may have a car and may be able to drive on a Saturday myself, if I own a business downtown or out at the mall, it certainly is critical to my business that these individuals are able to reach my place so that I can do what I do best, which is to serve the public.
Now you infused, I think it was $500,000 into the public transportation this year. It was a one-time shot. Do you see that being annualized?
I think we will very much attempt to annualize that. It's hard to give promises, you know, especially before elections happen. But our intention has been that, especially as our economy is growing, when we do add a program like that or secure a program, we want to annualize that. The only times we have been in cuts has been cutback mode, but it has been for the last 10 years, has been as our coffers dwindled. We had new money this year. The first priority was not to create new programs, but was to sustain the programs we had or to reinstitute programs that had been cut. And so I think that you will see a very clear push to make this annualized money in the future.
Is this a matching fund kind of program where the federal government will match whatever dollars you put in, or are we talking about a whole different?
In this case, we're talking about a different situation, but those kinds of programs do exist. In fact, we have some programs where we collect the money and send the majority of it to the federal government, and that's one that we're wanting to change as well, where we retain more of our monies here for development. So it can be done in any different kinds of ways. Many of them are done in partnership with the federal government.
Okay. The welfare bill that was signed last week, how is that going to impact the state of Oklahoma and specifically your job in the legislature?
Well, you know, this is another surprise. What Oklahomans don't realize is we already passed this very same law 2 years ago. Our legislature did pass the bill that limited the length of time one could be on AFDC, on welfare, to 60 months. In a 60-month period, we limited it to 24 months. You could recycle after those 5 years if something happened. We did say that there would be no increased payment for newly born children, although they would be allowed WIC and food stamps. So the most dramatic pieces that have been argued across the country in this welfare reform bill are a part of the Oklahoma package, have been, and already well underway. Therefore, I don't think there will be much of an impact in Oklahoma. The good news, which is a strange way to put it, is that if we move to the block grant system, because our rolls were so high 5 years ago, we will benefit, and that's where the benchmark will be in terms of how much money comes to a state. We will do well because our rolls are so low now. For the first time in 5 years, our AFDC recipients are under 100,000 population. That is very low when you consider that 1 in 4 children live in poverty. So we are working hard to return people to work, to make it possible for them to work, and Oklahomans do not want to be dependent on a system of the government.
The reduction in the rolls, is this a reflection of the improving economy, or is it a reflection of the bill that was passed 2 years ago, or combinations?
I think the impetus is the bill that was passed. I think that's the reflection. The work that we do have to do, I believe, is in helping find adequate paying jobs for these individuals so that they can stay free of welfare. We have work to do in that. We have some ideas about how to do that. Interestingly enough, we were talking about that last year in our legislature, and the President talked last night about some sort of tax breaks or vouchers for business people who might put these individuals to work. That's where we were going anyway.
Okay, I think it might be useful to, if we can quickly, define exactly who benefits or who is eligible to receive welfare, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, I know, among my students, and it's a real frustrating conversation sometimes. They perceive it as single adults with no children, male or female, that anyone can walk in and get welfare.
To some degree, that's true. Anyone, you are not penalized by having to be married or unmarried or have children, but the time limit is like 60, 90 days. If you have been laid off, you might get food stamps for 60, 90 days if you are unable to secure employment. Again, there is a poverty level. You can have only a certain amount of goods that you own. I think that the value of your car at this point We did raise that to $2,500 instead of $1,500, so you can have a clunker of a car now, and that doesn't make you unable. But there are very clear benchmarks about what you can have in real property, what you can have in assets, what you can have in terms of money in the bank or support. And on that basis, and on what your other commitments are to family and children, how long you can be on welfare and for what length of time. But we're really saying now that 1 year is pretty much our limit. After that year, if you have a infant child, that the medical care may go on for another year. But we are really shortening what's available.
Okay. How will the new minimum wage law impact the state? Do you have any sense of how that's going to affect us?
The things I read out of the Department of Commerce say that it will not impact us as heavily as some other states. Now, that's not to say we take that lightly. Last year, as you know, there was an attempt in the legislature to perhaps do a minimum wage raise for Oklahoma. I was not in favor of that measure. I was not in favor of Oklahoma going ahead and raising the minimum wage without the country doing that as a whole. I think we all also know that a minimum wage 40-hour week job will not take care of an individual and certainly a couple and family. So my understanding from the Department of Commerce is that because our economy is moving, because the jobs that we have brought in since 1992 with the Quality Jobs Act, the 46,000 jobs are your technical jobs, your higher paying jobs that we've been attracting, that we will be able to sustain the additional 10 cents on the hamburger that might have to be paid out if we are raising the rate for our minimum wage workers. But then simultaneously, we hope that will reduce our welfare rolls. So there will be an impact. I don't want to minimize that. I don't want to minimize the small business person in a college community where many college students depend on minimum wage jobs to fill in, to make extras, or to just make the end meets. It is an issue, but I think we'll be able to weather that because of the overall growth we're seeing.
Okay, one of the hot button issues right now, of course, is the shall we say, attack on teachers' unions and the perceived attack on teachers as a fallout to that. As a member of the legislature, and OEA is a very strong lobbying group, and the AFT is a very active lobbying group as well. Where do you perceive the quote-unquote teachers' union roles in a lot of what has happened in Oklahoma over the last several years?
Well, first of all, I'm ashamed of a government that would make a statement that our teachers are dumbing down our students. That is embarrassing. That is inappropriate. To call our teachers slugs is, again, what we would expect of, and I don't mean to insult middle school students, but maybe middle school students in a fit of anger. I think that is very inappropriate, very unprofessional, and helps no one. In fact, the AFT and the NEA are your representative voices at the legislature. Like any other republic, you participate with your dues. You have some voice in saying who the leadership will be through committees, through elections, and then they communicate with the legislature. Like any good lobbyist, and yes, they are a lobbying group, they will be able to tell a legislator what they want, why they want it, and what the opposition will be and what the negatives or the impact could be of the requests they're making. That is the same way that it works with the Farm Bureau. That is the way it works with the oil companies. That's the way it works with any other government entity.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll be back in just a moment with two students from Central Mid High School. Our student guests this week are Stacy Carmen and Julian Lever, and I believe Stacy, Julian decided you should go first.
Okay. What got you interested in politics?
Stacy, I've always been interested in politics looking back. My father was the chaplain at North Carolina State University as I grew up, and that is Jesse Helms territory. If you know that name, he's the U.S. Senator from North Carolina. And they were about 180 degrees apart from each other in their philosophy, and so there was a lot of talk around our table. My mother is still a secretary in the North Carolina legislature. And I was a page as a kid growing up. I never thought of it as a career. In fact, I can remember working with Carolyn Thompson on some issues, promising myself I would never do this after I saw the hard work that she had to put in and all the variables. I had an opportunity when Carolyn left to seek this job, which I did, and I'm delighted to be here and very glad to eat those words and say I didn't want to do this. But I think looking back, while I had not directed my life toward politics, it is very much in my family, the participation in the kinds of events that go on in the world and in society that we have some responsibility for.
How long do you plan to pursue your political career, and how far do you want to take it?
Well, that certainly depends on the voters about how long I pursue it. I definitely want to stay in the House of Representatives another term or two to do some of the work that we have started right now. And I think in politics you also find that so much of it is the timing in the moment of opportunity. You have to be prepared, you have to be competent to do the job, and yet a lot of it is timing. There are only so many positions that one might be elected to. So there is no crystal ball to tell where I will go, what I will do. I do think that I have an ability to do public service. I have the fortitude to do public service and have enjoyed it. I would like to find some place to continue to contribute back to society, whether it be through elected position or something else.
All right, what do you think the campaign issues are going to be for this year?
I think you're going to see a lot of talk in all the campaigns across the state about the most important issues to Oklahoma. I know that as a candidate we will be talking about education, we'll be talking about crime and safety, we will be talking about continuing our economic growth, which has been very good these last 4 years, and one of the issues that I particularly lead is the issues for children and families. So I would say there's a four-pronged approach to the comments and to the message that I have to put forth.
What improvements do you think could be made or should be made in our school systems?
This year is a very difficult year for the Norman school system in particular, but for many school systems across the state. This is kind of a crunch year. This is a year between now enduring the cuts that we have had for the last several years, particularly the gifted and talented budget, enduring also the monies that are required to be put in to bolster the teacher retirement system. But then it's not till next year that our formula for midterm adjustments, for paying for each new student who comes into a system on a pay-as-you-go basis, a monthly basis, clicks in. So this is a very difficult crunch year. I think what we have to do, and I've already asked staff to look at this with me, is what is a particular piece of operating that we need to do to benefit systems like Norman, the ones that are most caught in these decisions. We are working on that. Money is actually what the issue will be. How do we bring resources, financial resources, to Norman and systems like Norman so that we can continue to do what we do better than any other district in the state in terms of public education?
Were you aware going into the legislative session with the creative ways that you try to solve the problem of mid-year adjustment and all of the other things that the impact that it was going to have on a Norman or an Edmond or a Putnam City, say?
We ran those figures. We knew we could tell how it would affect each district. What I was excited about was the increased appropriation per student. The fact that it would start with student number one instead of once you had a growth that exceeded 1.5% of your whole population, and that instead of having to spend the money and then be reimbursed at the end of the year, if there were money, that we were going to pay per student on a monthly basis as we go. So I felt that that was critical. It did mean that this year we did not meet the criteria for, we were still at the 1.5. And while we are a growing district, there's never been a question about that, we were going to have to somehow absorb that loss. But I thought the creativity for the future was well worth the trades that we had to make.
Okay. Great.
Do you have any new bills that you're proposing this term after you're reelected?
I will be bringing back in particular 2 bills that I have been working on last year. You may remember the Ryan Luke bill, Jillian. We have some more areas in that which is for the protection of children, particularly dealing with issues of child abuse and neglect. We have several more areas we've identified that we want to push further to reinstill in the community trust in the systems that work to protect our children and families. The other bill was a bill that we passed very well in the House last year that did not get heard in the Senate. And that bill sets up tuition savings accounts, tax deferred, for families to put away money to pay for college. We were ready last year to give this tax deferment for your state income tax. If you notice, you're hearing President Clinton on the national scene talk about doing that for your federal income tax, which would be very exciting. We had thought last year that this was such a good idea, we could have several states do it and we could carry the ball to get the feds to do it. Looks like the federal government may do it simultaneously with us, so I'm very excited about that bill.
Okay.
Okay. On House Bill 1017, do you think it helped or it hurt the systems? And was there anything that you'd like to change on it?
It very clearly helped the system, Stacy. It solidified for the citizens of Oklahoma an opportunity to say to the legislature, not just once, but every year, we believe that we have a right to high-quality education, and we believe that education is the future for our children. So it was extremely important, and what it did do in terms of diminishing class size, that's one of the themes that we have held on to. Some changes, but we've held on to that. There are pieces of 1017 that we have modified. We've had to modify them for monetary reasons. I wish we hadn't. This year we were slated for class sizes for grades 6, 7, and 8 to have to be 120, I think it was. And we went ahead and said, no, we'll let you stay at 140 per teacher. I wish we could have kept that, but we did keep the smaller caps in the elementary grades, and hopefully we'll be able to stay with some of the original intent of 1017. One of the programs we've never funded was the Healthy Living course that was to deal in a very positive way and in a voluntary way with issues of contagious diseases, starting with kindergarten, be sure you wash your hands before lunch, be sure you wash your hands after you sneeze. Things that I think families would be very supportive of. So 1017 was a major effort. It was a good effort. We have modified some of the errors that in implementation were not possible. No bill is perfect, but I think that really set the course for Oklahoma.
Great. Since 1964, Oklahoma has voted Republican in the presidential election. Do you think this year will be any different?
I think that it will not be different in the sense that as a state we will vote Republican. I think that the spread between the votes for Dole and the votes for Clinton will be much smaller than we have seen. I suspect it will still go Republican at the national level, would be my guess.
Do you see then the congressional representation staying heavily Republican?
I think we'll see some changes in the congressional seats. I think Glenn Johnson is running a very, very good race in the 2nd District. I think we have a very challenging race here in the 4th District between Congressman Watts and Ed Crocker. And I think we will see yet to develop an exciting race in the 3rd District as well with Wes Watkins and I hope Darrell Roberts. So I believe there will be changes in the congressional seats.
What about the Senate?
The Senate seat, I think, is more up for grabs than we realize. We're talking about an incumbent who is entrenched with financial resources and a challenger who has very few resources but is very bright, is very energetic, and carries a message that I think better represents all Oklahomans, Democrats and Republicans, than the incumbent does. So it really will be, I think, a contest between the message and the money.
Okay.
Where do you stand on the School to Work program?
I think School to Work is very important. The School to Work program is supported, by the way, this has been looked at for several years now, supported by the State Chamber of Commerce, by the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce, the Tulsa Chamber of Commerce, the Norman Chamber of Commerce. And the joke around our place has been that the State Chamber of Commerce and the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce never agree. For them to both agree that this is a priority for them, I think says something about the work that has been put into this and the thoughts about where it may take us. What School to Work is about, Stacy, is it is about taking those skills that we learn in school, that we learn in VOTEC particularly, and making them applicable for the workplace. Taking our technical skills so they can be applied, taking our basic learning in English, language arts, mathematics, so that they are applied to the real world, taking communications skills, and then teaching individuals how to think, not what to think, not to linearly follow step 1, 2, and 3 only, but in doing that to diagnose in this television set, is this in the electronic system, is this in the computer part that backs it up, making some decisions. The kinds of things we would expect surgeons to do, same kinds of processes around the human body and around that area of science. We're now looking at in other areas of science and technology, but also in banking and in other fields. I think it's a very important program that gives maximum control to the local community.
Oh, I'm out of questions.
Okay, Stacy, I think you have one more.
Yeah. And what do you feel should be done about independent living students?
We are working very hard to provide an opportunity for independent living students in Norman. We passed a bill this year that I think was critical to the success of this program that would allow students who have been left by their families or have had to leave through some urgent means of protecting their own safety and welfare to be able to seek shelter without repercussions to those individuals who are offering the safe harbor if they, in fact, will notify the parents or some law enforcement officers that those children are safe. Then we are working on collaborating so that resources that those students need to continue their education are available. I am highly impressed with every student that we have helped, every student that we have met. These are fine, fine individuals who are demonstrating the maturity and the fortitude to move forward at a level that I think would surprise us about many of our colleagues. They are committed to their education. They're committed to being very conservative about the resources they have available, and they are doing us all proud. We have much work to do, but we are well on the way to caring for those committed individuals.
I want to thank you very much for being with us this morning and wish you good luck in November. November what?
5th.
November 5th. Okay, hopefully we'll get a chance to visit with you again real soon.
Thank you, Sandy.
And we'll be back next week with another Capital Ideas.